My name is Anna. I am 31 years old. I work as a receptionist at a dental clinic, and I live in a quiet neighborhood with my husband, Julian. We've been married for 8 years. I married young, just after I turned 23. At the time, it felt right. Julian was kind and strong. He worked as an electrician and had just started taking small jobs on his own. I loved that he was hardworking and honest. He wasn't the kind of man who used big words, but when he said something, he meant it. We met at a friend's birthday dinner. I remember the room was loud and full of laughter, but somehow Julian and I found a quiet corner to talk. He asked me if I liked working at the clinic. I asked him how he got into electrical work. He smiled and said, "I like fixing things." I laughed and said, "Then maybe you'll be useful someday." That's how it began. A simple talk, a small spark, and within a year, we were married. Our wedding was sweet and simple. We didn't have much money, but we had love. I wore a borrowed dress. We danced in my aunt's backyard under string lights. I remember thinking, this is all I need. Just him and me. The first few years were beautiful. We didn't have much, but we had each other. We painted the kitchen together and laughed when we got paint on our clothes. Julian would bring home snacks after work and surprise me. We sat on the sofa and talked about our dreams. He wanted to start his own business. I wanted to travel one day, maybe see the sea. We shared everything: silly stories, late-night worries, hopes, fears. I never felt alone. I felt seen. But slowly, that changed. At first, it was small things. Julian came home more tired. He said less. He smiled less. I thought maybe he was just working too hard, so I tried to make home peaceful. I cooked warm meals. I gave him space to rest. I didn't ask too many questions. But over time, the silence between us grew louder. One evening I said, "The clinic was so busy today. A little boy asked if teeth grow back like hair." Julian looked at his phone and said, No laugh. No follow-up. He just went back to scrolling. I told myself it was fine. Not every day had to be perfect. Maybe tomorrow would be better. But tomorrow was the same. I made his favorite dinner, spaghetti with mushrooms and garlic bread. He came home, looked at the table and said, "I already ate." I said, "Oh, I thought we could eat together." He replied, "I had lunch late. I wasn't hungry." Then he turned on the TV. That night, I lay in bed beside him. I looked at his back and whispered, "Julian?" He didn't answer. I wasn't even sure he heard me. I began to feel invisible. I started asking myself, when did we stop talking? When did we become strangers sharing a house? I tried again and again. I asked if he wanted to take a weekend walk or go to the market together. He always said he was tired or had work to do. I once asked, "Do you still love me?" He looked confused and said, "Why would you ask something like that?" I said, "Because I can't feel it." He sighed and said, "I'm here, aren't I? Isn't that enough?" But it wasn't. Being in the same room is not the same as being together. I missed him, his voice, his eyes, his presence. I missed the way he used to pull me close on cold nights. Now, we both turned away. One Friday evening, I set the table with candles. It was the anniversary of our first date. I wore the same earrings I wore back then. I even curled my hair. Julian came home and said, "Why is the house so dark?" I said, "I made dinner. I thought we could eat together." He looked at the food. "Looks nice, but I already ate." "Sorry." I said, "Do you remember what day it is?" He blinked. "No." "What?" I smiled, but it felt heavy. "It's been 9 years since our first date." He paused. "Oh, right. Sorry. Happy whatever." He walked to the bedroom. I sat at the table alone. I didn't cry right away. I just stared at the food, at the candles. They flickered quietly, like they were tired too. After that night, I stopped trying so hard. I went to work. I came home. I cooked. I cleaned. I did the usual things. Julian did too. But we didn't talk. Not really. One morning, I forgot to iron his work shirt. He looked annoyed and said, "You had one thing to do." I wanted to scream, "I have everything to do." But I said nothing. I started keeping a journal. I wrote things I couldn't say aloud. "Julian, today I passed a bakery that smelled like our honeymoon. You didn't remember our date." I smiled anyway. "Do you see me anymore?" I never showed him the notebook. One Sunday, I went to a cafe alone. I sat for 2 hours, watching people talk, laugh, share bites of cake. A woman beside me smiled and said, "Waiting for someone?" I smiled back and said, "No, just needed a break." When I got home, Julian was on the sofa. He didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't even look up. He said, "We need milk." That night, I cried in the bathroom, quietly. I didn't want him to hear. I didn't want to explain. The saddest part isn't the silence. It's how normal it has become. Some days, I told myself things would get better. Maybe Julian was just going through something. Maybe I needed to be more patient. But deep inside, I knew this silence wasn't new anymore. It was now part of our life. At work, I tried to smile. I answered the phones at the clinic, greeted patients, and gave directions. But when people looked into my eyes, I wondered if they could see through me. I wondered if anyone could tell that I felt empty. One afternoon, my coworker Laura brought me a cupcake. It was from a bakery near her house. "You look like you need something sweet," she said with a smile. I thanked her and said, "Just tired." But I wasn't tired. I was lonely. That night, I brought the cupcake home and placed it on the kitchen table. I thought Julian and I could share it. Maybe we could sit down, talk, laugh, just for a minute?" When he came home, I said, "Laura brought this from her bakery. Want to try?" He looked at the table. "You know, I don't like sweets," he said flatly. He went to the bedroom and closed the door. I sat there, looking at the little cupcake, and for some reason, tears came. I didn't even feel sad in that moment, just numb. A few days later, I tried to talk again. "Do you think we're okay?" I asked quietly. Julian was fixing something on his phone. "What do you mean?" I said. "Us. Do you think we're okay?" He looked away. "We're fine. Why do you always ask these kinds of things?" "I just feel like we don't really talk anymore," I said. He sighed loudly. "We live together. We eat together. We sleep in the same bed. What else do you want?" I wanted to say, "I want your eyes. I want your voice. I want your love." But I said nothing. Before I go on, I need to know, where are you listening from? Knowing someone hears me, understands me, gives me strength. I started spending more time alone. On Saturdays, I went to the small park near the clinic. I sat on a bench and watched people walk their dogs or feed birds. I listened to the sounds around me, kids laughing, leaves blowing, life happening. Sometimes I took a book, but I didn't read. I just held it. Looking at the pages felt easier than looking at my life. At home, Julian became more distant. He stayed longer in the garage. He fixed small machines and worked on side jobs. He said less and less every week. One night I made soup. He came home, looked at the bowl and said, "Is this all we have?" I nodded. "It's fresh. I made it for you." He didn't say thank you. He just ate and left his dish in the sink. After he went to bed, I stood in the kitchen and washed the bowl. I looked out the window into the dark. I remembered our first apartment, where we once danced to music while washing dishes together. Now, there was no music, no laughter, only silence and water. A few weeks later, my parents invited us for dinner. I told Julian about it. He said, "You go. I'm busy that day." I asked, "Busy with what?" He looked annoyed. "Just things. Work. I don't know yet." I went alone. My mom asked, "Where's Julian?" I smiled and said, "Working late." But she gave me a look, a quiet, gentle look that said she didn't believe me. Later, she brought me tea and sat beside me. "Anna," she said, "are you happy?" I looked down. "I'm okay." She held my hand. Okay is not the same as happy. I wanted to cry, but I held it in. I didn't want to explain. I didn't even know how. On the way home, I walked slowly. I passed houses with lights in the windows. I saw shadows of people sitting at tables, talking. It looked warm. It looked full. When I got home, Julian was asleep on the sofa. The TV was still on. I turned it off. picked up a blanket, and covered him. I stood there for a second, just looking at his face. He looked peaceful in sleep. I wondered, where did you go? Where is the man I married? The next day I asked him, do you want to talk sometime? Maybe just go out like before? He said, I'm not a child. I don't need to go out to feel something. I smiled, but my heart hurt. One evening, I found an old photo album while cleaning. It had pictures from our early days, us painting the kitchen, eating ice cream on the floor, smiling in cheap sunglasses. I waited for Julian to come home. When he did, I held the album out. Do you remember this? I asked. He looked at the cover. Yeah, old stuff. I opened the page. This was the night we burned the rice and had popcorn for dinner. He glanced for a second. Funny. I'm tired. I'm going to bed. He didn't even turn the page. I sat with the album in my lap. My hands shook slightly. I closed it slowly and placed it back in the drawer. It felt like closing a door. One night, I came home early. Julian was outside talking to someone. I stayed inside and watched through the window. He was laughing, smiling. His voice was full of life. I hadn't seen him like that in months. When he came in, I said, You seemed happy just now. He looked surprised. What? I saw you outside, laughing. I miss that side of you. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, Maybe you miss who I used to be. People change, Anna. I nodded. Yes, people change. But do they stop caring? He didn't say anything. He just went to take a shower. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking, if I disappeared tomorrow, would he notice? The next morning, Julian left early. No goodbye, no coffee, just the sound of the door closing. I sat on the bed and held my cup of tea. I felt the quiet of the house pressing against me like heavy air. That was when I realized something. We hadn't had a real conversation in months. Not about dreams, not about fears, not even about simple things like how we were feeling. We were two people sharing a roof, but not a life. And I didn't know how to fix it anymore. The days after that morning were quiet. Too quiet. I stopped trying. I stopped asking questions. I stopped hoping Julian would notice. I did what I had to do. Woke up, went to work, came home, made dinner. But inside, I was shutting down. I still smiled at patients at the clinic. I still answered phones and said, "Have a nice day." But the truth was, I didn't know what a nice day felt like anymore. One afternoon, my coworker Laura asked, "Do you want to come with me to a pottery class this weekend?" I smiled politely. "Thanks, but I think I'll stay home." She looked at me for a moment. "Anna, do you ever do anything for yourself?" That question stayed with me all evening. I sat at home while Julian worked in the garage. I looked around our quiet living room and asked myself the same thing. When was the last time I did something just for me? That weekend, I changed my answer. I went to the pottery class with Laura. It was simple: clay, water, music, and people laughing. I didn't know what I was doing, but I laughed too. I made a small bowl. It wasn't perfect. It was crooked and soft on one side. But when I held it in my hands, I felt proud. Not because it looked good, but because I made something. Something that was mine. After class, Laura said, "That smile suits you." I smiled bigger. "Thank you." When I came home, Julian was on the sofa. He didn't ask where I was. He didn't even look up. I went to the kitchen, made tea, and sat alone. But I didn't feel sad. Not that night. I had done something small, but it reminded me that I was still here. Still alive. The next week, I signed up for another class. Then I started walking after dinner. I passed shops and bakeries. I watched kids riding bikes and people walking dogs. I kept my phone in my bag and let the world move around me. Julian didn't ask why I was coming home later. He didn't ask at all. One night, I came home and found the house dark. No dinner, no noise, just quiet. I turned on the light and saw a note on the table. It said, "Went to a friend's. Don't wait up." It was the first time he left a note in months. I stared at the paper. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel hurt. I just felt done. That night, I sat with my journal and wrote something different. "Julian, I don't know who we are anymore." I waited. I begged with silence. I begged with meals, with smiles, with patience. I begged by staying. But I can't keep begging. I still love the memory of us. But I can't live in a memory. I closed the book and went to sleep. The next morning, I got up early. I cleaned the house. I washed the sheets. I cooked breakfast. Then I sat across from Julian and said, "Can we talk?" He looked at me. "Now?" "Yes." "Please." He put down his fork. "Okay." I looked at him, not with anger, but with calm. "I don't want to live like this anymore." Julian didn't answer right away. He looked down, then said, "You're saying it's my fault?" I shook my head. "I'm not blaming you. I'm just telling you how I feel. We don't talk. We don't laugh. You don't ask how I am. You don't see me." He sighed. "I didn't know it was that bad." I nodded. "That's the problem." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do you want me to say?" "I don't want words," I said softly. "I want truth. Do you still want this marriage?" Julian looked away. His hands were still. His voice was low. "I don't know." I felt something crack inside. But it wasn't sharp. It was quiet, like a thread finally snapping after being pulled too long. "Thank you for being honest," I said. "I think I need time. I need space." Julian didn't argue. He just nodded. That weekend, I packed a small bag and went to stay with my cousin for a while. Her place was small but warm. She welcomed me with open arms and soft blankets. She didn't ask for details. She just said, "Rest. You deserve it." In that quiet space, I found myself again. I wrote more. I painted one morning. I called my mom and cried. I told her everything. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just listened. And then she said, "You're brave, Anna. I'm proud of you." A few days later, I got a message from Julian. It said, "Can we talk soon?" I said, "Yes, but not yet." I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I just needed time. I didn't know what the future would look like. Maybe we would try again. Maybe we wouldn't. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of being alone. I wasn't waiting to be seen. I was seeing myself. And that was a start. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and share. More emotional and inspiring stories are coming soon.